what has all happened the last couple of months has been terrible, and I've gone through different stages of emotion reflecting on it. But now I'm at the stage where I'm angry, and I'm also passionate to do more communication. I think I've been more active now because of this passion. I feel it's so urgent that we communicate the importance of our science to the public.
Welcome to the ClimateGenn podcast. My name is Nick Breeze, and in this episode, I'm speaking with Zack Labe. Zack is well known for his engaging graphics that tell the climate change story. He also played a pivotal role at the US National Oceanic Atmospheric Association, or NOAA, in advancing climate modeling and forecasting through innovative AI and machine learning approaches. His forced departure, along with hundreds of other scientists due to DOGE-led federal cuts, has significantly undermined NOAA's research capacity. The loss not only stalls progress in critical climate science, but also poses real risks to public safety and the global understanding of climate change. In the next episode, I'm speaking with Professor Mark Maslin at University College London about the World Meteorological Organization's recent climate report that shows how climate heating is getting hotter faster. In a forthcoming episode with Dr. Sumitra Das, we also discuss Indian heat waves that are killing people as parts of the country reach the wet bulb tipping point. This is where humidity and heat shut down the body's ability to cool itself. This is why Sumitra is pushing for a national cooling plan for India. I also catch up with Professor Hugh Hunt from the Centre for Climate Repair in Cambridge, ahead of their international conference on how to repair the climate system. What has changed since the last Cambridge Geoengineering Conference, and is climate cooling technology inevitable in the face of global government backsliding on eradicating fossil fuels? I currently only release one episode per week to the public, but all episodes can be previewed ahead of time in the members area for Patreon and YouTube members. Please do like, share, comment and feedback. Your support is appreciated and vital to the ClimateGenn project. You can also order my book Cop Out online anywhere in paperback or audio formats. Thank you very much. So Zack, it's great to see you again. Thank you very much for taking the time. I just want to start by asking you what your current status is with NOAA, where you've been working for so long.
Yeah, well, currently I'm no longer affiliated with NOAA. I actually just started a new position with an organization called Climate Central. This is my second week.
Oh, congratulations. Can you talk a little bit about what your research has been doing at NOAA and how it fits into the sort of broader efforts to understand the climate changes that we're all experiencing?
So my work, I think, very broadly has been about disentangling climate change versus climate variability or the influence of weather and trying to find, as I like to say, the signals and the noise, where the signals climate change, the noise is weather. And so there's been a lot of techniques to do this in climate science. But one area that we've been particularly excited about is the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence methods to really provide a way to get maybe new insights into this disentangling the signal and noise. So a lot of my work was related to thinking about how can we apply these methods, which really these AI methods that we use are actually just kind of fancy statistics. It's not like a chat GPT. It's quite different. So in essence, it's this statistical method that's really good at finding nonlinear components in your system. And in climate, we know that there's lots of nonlinearities, which was why we were excited about using this. So that was one area of research. And then another area of research, I was in a group called the Seasonal to Decadal Variability and Predictability Division, which I realize is a mouthful. But in essence, we were just thinking about climate prediction problems at a bit longer time scale than we normally think about, especially like a weather forecast. For this work, we're trying to think about, can we provide insights on things like extreme heat or other types of weather, a season in advance? Could we tell you a couple months ago whether this summer would be really hot in your area? It's a very uncertain but very exciting new area of research.
You've been famous really on social media for your visualizations and charts, and When you look at all of those, and you talked about the work of trying to use machine learning, but can you give an example of one of those? Do they relate to any of the images, like the sea ice is something is there any sort of tie-ins with those that are quite tangible?
There's a bit. So originally, as you mentioned, my research was focused on the Arctic. So in graduate school, I focused a lot on Arctic questions. But really, since then, I've kind of broadened my own personal research scope. But we did do one particular project related to some of these new statistical methods for the Arctic. And the question was really trying to answer is, there's a lot of uncertainties, as we know, within the Arctic. It's a hard place to get observations. The satellite record of data is not very long. So that also, is challenging to evaluate our climate models. How well are they doing with capturing change within the Arctic? So one of these methods we utilized was machine learning is, can we utilize these statistics to better evaluate how well our climate models are doing compared to the changes we're observing? So I think that was one particular tie-in that we did with the Arctic.
And how did it perform?
It was useful in providing some sort of ranking between the models. Admittedly, I don't think I remember which model might have scored the best, but it was just a kind of a different approach for, comparing these different models. And they all have challenges. None of them are perfect. And that's okay. We actually expect that. But these types of methods can be useful at trying to figure out, okay, maybe it doesn't capture sea ice change in this area. How can we go about fixing this problem? So it can be very useful for developing the next generation of models.
A moment ago, you mentioned some of the work you're doing in this with the machine learning, trying to work out whether you can anticipate weather maybe a couple of months out. We've just heard this report from the WMO stating that the thresholds for climate change that the IPCC talks about are sort of coming closer. And a few years ago, they came closer from where they were a few years ago. Does any of your work anticipate how climate impacts are accelerating towards us?
Actually, yes, but it was the opposite of what you just described. So this was inspired years ago. It seems like a long time ago, but there was a lot of talk in both in the scientific community and in the political sphere about the hiatus. So when there was, a slowdown in the rate of global temperature, we now can reflect on that. Obviously, it's now, as you said, increasing further. But there were hundreds of research papers trying to understand this period of time, why the global temperature wasn't increasing at the rate some of the climate models were showing. And of course, it was challenging to communicate this type of variability to the public, to politicians and decision makers. So it actually inspired this research question that I asked a couple years ago, which was, could we predict slowdowns in the rate of the global temperature using combining climate models with observations, the real world, and these machine learning methods? And this would provide us insight also on, how could we predict these? If they can successfully predict them, what are the causes of some of these slowdowns? Because we know that, going forward into the future, we expect that there will be periods where the temperature is rising quite quickly, the rate of change for a couple years, but there will also be periods where the rate of change is slower. That's expected, climate variability versus climate change. So what we did is we set up to utilize some of these machine learning methods, and we provided this statistical model information about ocean heat. And that was actually quite insightful. And the question we were asking is, could you predict whether the next 10 years will experience a slowdown in the rate of the temperature trend? And we found that the statistical model was actually pretty good at being able to predict it. And it related to ocean heat in the Pacific Ocean in particular. So I haven't had the time yet. I would love to do this, is to do this for the opposite question. Can you predict these accelerating periods like for the next decade in advance? So hopefully one of these days I'll dive into that question. And I think we'd be able to find some skill.
I mentioned earlier how your visualizations that you publish quite a lot on different social media platforms have really resonated with people. And climate scientists often say it's very difficult to communicate science, but these graphics did reach a lot of people. How do you see this kind of climate communication at a time when it's quite a fraught conversation to have anywhere?
Yeah, I think it's so important to continue the conversation. Climate change, as we know, is not going anywhere. The impacts are going to only, amplify going forward into the future. So now we cannot stop communicating the science, even though we're having our own troubles being able to research it, particularly in the federal, side of things in the US government. But this is now a time we need more communication. And I always advocate, the question I get a lot is, what is the best way to communicate climate change? And there's been research published about it. You can go to workshops on this, and I don't claim any. I'll be clear, claim any expertise of it. I'm not an expert communicator. However, my kind of go-to answer is whatever you're comfortable with. My personal view is I don't think there's one right or wrong way to communicate climate change. And for me, I found that I work with a lot of data. Is my day job. And understand the data, and I feel that that's my way of communicating climate change is through visualizing the data and making it accessible. It's not just putting a graph out there that no one can understand, what is being shown, but how can I make anyone, experts understand this data and bring them into the science? So I always share where can you find the data? Where can you find the methods on how I made this graphic or how the data came about? And to me, this is all about transparency. It's making climate science more accessible and transparent. And that all, for me, leads to trust. And I think the more and more trust we can build in climate science, the better communications we will have.
And they're very visceral images. And you mentioned the federal government just then. How can we respond in a way? I think there's a lot of anxiety around the world about the loss of the research that's flowing from all these quite savage cuts to places like NOAA, NASA, and so on. Can you give us your perspective on where does that go? Do we lose it forever? Is it safe? Are there pathways forward?
I wish I could be a little more positive, but I'll try my best. There are certainly pathways forward, and there are many efforts to archive the data and such. But there are many challenges. Climate science is actually one of the most data-rich sciences there is. I mean, the amount of data that is produced by a climate model is mind-blowing. And there is no way to archive that type of data on like your personal computer or even big servers. It's just an unprecedented amount of data. So it's challenging to even think about where to put that if the resources it's currently on are no longer supported. So there are big challenges going ahead with data. There's also challenges related to our observations. So, it's great to archive past observational data, like let's say buoy, ocean sea surface temperature, buoy data. But we also need to continue to monitor that in real time. Having gaps in our data only make us, less certain, in our ability to be able to predict future change. So we cannot have gaps in the data. And all of this is due to resources that we need to support. Whenever I go into, I won't get into it too much, but there's really not that many resources that actually support observations right now for that we use for climate data. I mean, I post all these data sets all the time, but they're actually in sometimes a pretty fragile ecosystem where it's just a few people, some cases in their free time, just kind of turning a crank to update the data, and there's no institutional support for that data. So I always, encourage that we need to advocate for the importance of the science, the importance of its data to funnel more resources in to encourage its longevity going forward.
Are we now really at that point where data sources are really at risk? Records, are they being lost or are they being archived well? I mean, how big are the gaps, do you think?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any data sets that have been necessarily eliminated, but there are quite a few cases now where the data set has basically been archived and it will no longer be updated, or the data will still be produced, but there are no longer resources to maintain it. to service it. So one example is a sea ice data set. It's called the Sea Ice Index, which is from the National Snow and Ice Data Center. And there was recently an announcement that there will no longer perhaps be support to answer questions about the data, or if something breaks with the data set. These data sets are quite fragile, the infrastructure. So if something, happens, that there's a data outage, there will be less resources and people available to fix it right away. Or if I send an email and I find something strange in the data, there might not be anyone to answer my email for quite a while. And so, data service, as I like to call it, is a huge part of what we do. It's not just gathering the data, but it's, providing the data as a service, as a product. And so we're seeing big gaps in that, and that affects our ability to understand our changing climate.
We're saying this at a time when a glacier in the Alps collapsed over, an evacuated village, thank God. But in Canada, these vast, full horizon fires, and these are the consequences of our sort of burning of fossil fuels and all the stuff we've been doing wrong, and policymakers have looked the other way. And we're sort of almost weakening ourselves. And what happens in America resonates right across Europe, right across Britain, right across Asia. It goes all the way around the world. So as someone who's been immersed in it with NOAA, how do you navigate forward from here? What are you doing now? What's the game plan for Zack Labe?
Well, I admittedly feel, I think, even more motivated to continue understanding climate change, extreme events, and communicating that. I feel like what has all happened the last couple of months has been terrible, and I've gone through different stages of emotion reflecting on it. But now I'm at the stage where I'm angry, and I'm also passionate to do more communication. I think I've been more active now because of this passion. I feel it's so urgent that we communicate the importance of our science to the public. And so I'm going to continue doing that. I want to acknowledge that I have a privilege in that I'm fortunate to have a large audience that I can reach through my social media. So I feel that I'm going to utilize that privilege and that platform to communicate the importance of the science, because us scientists, we're not trained communicators. Many of us would rather, be behind the computer focusing on our research and not out in the public eye. So I like communicating. So I feel that I'm going to do all that I possibly can to stick up for science going forward into the future. There's no great plan of exactly what that might look like, but it's something I feel strongly about and think about every single day.
Well, what you've literally just said has been reinforced by so many scientists who live streaming over the last few days as a warning, as a sort of a signal. You talk about signal and noise, but they were trying to send a signal that there's a lot at risk here. And when you think of all these scientists together, all this talent, all this expertise, the vital role they play in our lives, where does it go? Is it all finding other jobs in the US? Are people leaving the US? Is there a long-term brain drain on the US from this, do you think?
Yeah, that's a major concern, particularly again for early career scientists. That my main message to everyone I speak to is I'm most concerned about early career scientists and the next generation of scientists, those who are in college who want to grow up and be a scientist, because the challenges are huge. What I would like to, I don't claim an expertise in this either, but I would like more stories on how actually scientific funding works. How do graduate students get funding? Where does this come from, and how actually delicate and fragile it is? And so I constantly am hearing students reach out to me that their admission into graduate school was rescinded at the last minute, or their internship at the premium government laboratory in the US was canceled for the coming summer, or many stories like this. I could go on and on. And this is terrifying to me, because this is our future. This is the future generation of scientists who are going to continue working on the climate change problem, bring all of their energy and creative ideas to solve this great challenge. And there are already barriers to getting into science, and that we've been trying so hard to break down. And it just feels like this wall has come up. So my main concern is not necessarily that, people are going to just leave the US. That's a quite difficult thing to do. But it's that people are just going to pivot their career entirely. So I'm hearing a lot more conversations about not that scientists are moving out of the US, but that they're leaving science. They're going into completely different careers, data science, things unrelated to that. And that's my concern.
And it is at a time, that we've mentioned earlier, the consequences now are really being felt so hard of climate change. And you've talked about your work now as well, involving so much AI and machine learning in a way that helps us decode the challenges we face even more. But at the same time, the flip side of that is that we're being bombarded with the chatbot stuff, the AI agent stuff, and it's starting to get a bit creepy. It's like we're all going to be subject to some sort of AI overlord nonsense. But in your view, is machine learning, AI, is it still a major part of the solution for all of us? Or do you think that it could end up just being a big problem for all of us, given things like energy consumption by the bigger guys and all that kind of thing?
Yeah, admittedly, I don't enjoy those chatbot features either. And anytime I, do a software, I turn them off usually. So I totally resonate with that. Yeah, my key message is AI doesn't have to be a bad word. Like the way I'm using it, it really is just statistics. It's not these chatbot things, and it's really in the purposes I use it for, it's not necessarily that computationally energy expensive. It's just to get into a little statistics. If you plot like a line through a graph, like, that I often do, it's like linear regression, we call it. So in the machine learning that I do is if we have a graph that's kind of not linear, it tries to fit that. And as you've discussed before in your show, that there's many nonlinear components of the climate system. So I think these tools are really exciting. They're also being used to improve weather and climate models. And so right now, when we run climate models, they're really energy intensive to run these supercomputers. Like I think I said, climate science is one of the most data intensive fields. And same with our climate models. They're run on some of the most powerful supercomputers in the world. So right now, scientists are actually working on utilizing machine learning to try to improve the efficiency of climate models, make them less expensive to run. So I think in many cases, they're actually being used for purposes to make things more efficient rather than less. The chatbot thing, that's a whole another area. I play no expertise in that and get equally annoyed.
Well, I'm going to take that positive note as a place to put a full stop. And thank you for taking the time. As I said before, it's great to see you're still communicating. I did see some of your really impassioned posts on Blue Sky about the stuff you've been going through, and well done for keeping going. And I hope everything starts to get better on that front.
Yeah, thank you.
If you are concerned about the future, then why not travel with me through every COP conference from COP21 in Paris to COP28 in Dubai by ordering my book COP Out: How Governments Have Failed the People on Climate. In COP Out, you'll gain insights into what is actually going on in these supposed world-saving conferences and how we have ended up in this dire era of dangerous consequences. You can order COP Out via the link in the notes or on any online bookstore worldwide in paperback or audio version.